Hey bookworms, it's Jade from Bedtime Bookworm and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here to talk to you about my best and worst audiobooks that I listened to in 2018. Before I start talking about audiobooks, I want to get your opinion on something. This is the 8th video that I've made as part of my year wrap-up series, and I gotta be honest, I'm getting a little bit tired of talking about my 2018 reading, and I'm sure some of you might be tired of hearing about it as well. Last year, my audiobook video was the last one that I had made, but this year I had 2 more video ideas that I was planning on making related to wrapping up 2018. However, now I am a little bit on the fence about whether or not I want to make them. So I thought I would get your opinion. The other 2 video ideas that I had were, one, to talk about new-to-me authors that I discovered in 2018 and really enjoyed. The second idea was to do the best and worst series of 2018 book tag. This was a book tag created by Mara from Books Like Whoa. I will link her original video down in the description box so you guys can check out the questions and see if you're interested in hearing my answers to them, because I did read a lot of series in 2018 and I thought that tag would be a cool way to talk about them. So I'm going to put a couple polls up in the little eye symbol in the top right hand corner. So click there and let me know if you guys are interested in seeing those video ideas. If I do end up making them, I probably won't make them until mid-March or so because I have other more regular type of content that I want to get out right now. Okay, moving on to the audiobooks that I listened to in 2018. I listened to a lot of audiobooks, and of course a lot of the audiobooks I listened to I loved, and there were a handful of audiobooks that I didn't like. So I'm going to start with my best audiobooks and then follow that with my worst audiobooks. For my best audiobooks, I'm actually going to talk about them by narrator instead of book because I had quite a few books that were narrated by the same person. The first narrator I want to talk about is Michael Kramer. He was actually my most listened to narrator last year, and that's because he narrates all of the Wheel of Time books, but he also narrated A Conjuring of Light by Victoria Schwab, as well as the first 2 books in the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. Michael Kramer just has a really great voice. I think he does a really good job with narrating fantasy. He does a lot of work for Tor, which I think is perfect. He's really good at having different voices for various characters so that they're easy to tell apart. And he's also really good at fake accents, like accents in these fantasy worlds that don't exist in the real world. And of course, I can't talk about Michael Kramer without talking about Kate Redding. She's often his female narrator. I found out last year that Matt Kramer and Kate Redding are actually married, which I think is amazing. She does the female voices in the Wheel of Time series, as well as in A Conjuring of Light. She's also really good at doing various voices and accents, and I think she is fantastic at conveying emotion through her voice, and she's really good at making me laugh. The next narrator I want to talk about is John Lindstrom, and he narrated Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, which was one of my favorite books from last year. I think that I would have loved Dark Matter even if I hadn't listened to it on audio, but I think John Lindstrom's narration definitely enhanced my experience. I could not get enough of this audiobook, and I listened to it in practically 2 sittings. I mean, part of it, of course, was the book. It was so action-packed and hard to put down, but his voice acting was amazing, and I definitely recommend the Dark Matter audiobook. Next, I want to talk about Steve West. He narrated Strange the Dreamer, and he's just amazing at narrating. I will listen to anything Steve West narrates. This wasn't my first time listening to Steve West, and I already knew that he is a fantastic narrator. So when I saw that he was the narrator for Strange the Dreamer, I just knew that I had to listen to it on audio. If you're considering listening to Strange the Dreamer and its sequel, I definitely recommend doing it because of Steve West. He also narrates the An Ember in the Ashes series if you're interested. Next, I want to talk about Peter Kenny. The book that I listened to him narrate was Sword of Destiny by Andrzej Sapkowski. This is the 2nd book in the Witcher series. I read the first book as an ebook, and I had noticed that it was pretty dialogue heavy, which is a hard writing style for me to read sometimes. But I thought that maybe if I listened to it on audio, I wouldn't be bothered as much by all of the dialogue. So for the 2nd book, I decided to try the audiobook, and it definitely helped. I still ended up giving Sword of Destiny only 3 stars, but it wasn't because of the narrator. I thought that Peter Kenny did an amazing job, and I'm now interested in finding more books that he narrates. Next, I want to talk about Bonnie Turpin. I listened to her narrate Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. I had heard of this narrator before. She's done a lot of other books, but I had heard of her from when she narrated The Hate U Give. When I saw that she was the narrator for Children of Blood and Bone, I immediately knew that I wanted to listen to it on an audiobook, and I'm so glad that I did. Children of Blood and Bone is based on African mythology, and Bonnie Turpin did an amazing job with the accents and the pronunciation of some of the African words in the book that I would have totally butchered or said differently in my head if it wasn't for her narration. I will definitely be listening to more Bonnie Turpin in the future. Next, I have Polly Lee, and I listened to her narrate The Fate of the Tearling by Erica Johansson. I listened to all 3 books in the Queen of the Tearling trilogy, and they all had different narrators, but out of the 3, Polly Lee was my favorite. She did an awesome job with different voices for characters, and I just love the way that she voiced the main character Kelsey, because in the prior 2 books I had some issues with how some of the characters were voiced, but I didn't have any issues with this last book thanks to Polly Lee. I hadn't heard her narrate anything before, but I'm definitely on the lookout for more of her books. I saw that she narrated And the Trees Crept In by Dawn Kurtagich, which I've heard is amazing on audio, and so I'm really excited to listen to that one. Next, I have Lisa Flanagan. She's the one who narrated Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. I thought that Lisa Flanagan, again, did a really good job voicing the various point of view characters, because there's like 6 of them. One of them is a young child, one of them is an old lady, and then there's multiple female perspectives, and she made them all sound so different from each other. She also gave them a slight Russian accent that wasn't too strong, which is a problem that I had with the narrator for Uprooted when I tried to listen to that in 2017. I looked to see what else she's narrated, and the only one that I'm really interested in is The Unseen World by Liz Moore. That's been on my TBR for a while, so when I do get around to reading that, I'm definitely going to listen to it on audiobook, now that I know that Lisa Flanagan is the narrator. The last 2 that I'm going to talk about aren't really narrators. I mean, they're kind of narrators, but they're narrators for their own memoirs. I really enjoyed listening to Trevor Noah narrate his memoir, Born a Crime. I've already talked about that book a couple times recently because I loved it so much, but if you plan on picking up that book, I highly recommend listening to it on audio. Unfortunately, I think it might be an Audible exclusive, which I hate Audible exclusives and I hate recommending that, but I think hearing Trevor Noah tell his story in his own voice really added to my enjoyment of that book. The other memoir that I listened to and loved was The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. I just think it's nice when you're reading a memoir to listen to the author narrate it themselves, because you're able to hear the tone and inflections that they use to talk about their story. So I have 4 books that I want to talk about for my worst audiobooks, and for these I'm going to talk about them more based on the book, because some of these are narrators that I've enjoyed in the past, but for various reasons I didn't enjoy listening to these books on audio. So the first book I want to talk about is Vicious by V.E. Schwab, and this was narrated by Noah Michael Levine. The narration of this book wasn't so bad that I wasn't able to listen to it at all, but I can definitely say that the narration didn't add anything to the story. I just didn't think the narrator did all that great of a job adding emotion or inflection into the characters, and I was left wondering if I would have enjoyed the book more if I hadn't listened to it. Next, I have My Plain Jane by the Lady Janies, which includes Brody Ashton, Jody Meadows, and Cynthia Hand. This was narrated by Fiona Hardingham, which is a narrator that I have listened to many times before, and I think she's actually a fantastic narrator. So this was definitely specific to this book for me. So there are ghosts in this book, and it is a comedy, so it's meant to be silly. And what I didn't like was that when she voiced a lot of the ghosts, she voiced them with a really funny voice. Particularly, the main character Jane has a best friend who is a ghost, and the voice that she used for this best friend sounded a lot like Moaning Myrtle from the Harry Potter movies. It was very, I don't know, wailing sounding and very exaggerated, and I did not like that voice at all. I understand why she did it, because this book is meant to be funny, but every time that ghost would talk, it would kind of pull me out of the story, and I just didn't enjoy that. So while I adore Fiona Hardingham as a narrator, and I've loved other books that she's narrated, I don't particularly recommend listening to My Plain Jane because I didn't like the way she voiced the ghosts. Of course, that's very subjective, and other people might like it. In sort of a similar situation, the next book I want to talk about is Jane Unlimited by Rebecca Soler. Again, Rebecca Soler is a narrator that I have listened to many times and absolutely adore. She is a fantastic narrator. But the reason why I want to talk about Jane Unlimited is more to do with the structure of the book. and has nothing to do with Rebecca Soler or any of the voices that she used. Jane Unlimited is sort of like a choose-your-own-adventure style of book. The story starts out with one main story, and then there's a decision point where you get 4 different storylines that could happen from that one decision point. And because of that structure, I find that listening to it on audio was a little confusing. And in fact, in the physical book, which I also had gotten out from my library, I could see that in the beginning it's not really a map, but it kind of lays out the structure of the story using a picture of an umbrella with like the handle of the umbrella being the beginning of the story, and then the prongs of the umbrella are the different story paths that come off of the decision point. And I thought that having that picture was really helpful in understanding how the story would go, but without having seen the physical book, I wouldn't have understood that at all. I just think that if you're gonna read Jane Unlimited, even though Rebecca Soler is a fantastic narrator, it might be a little confusing to listen to it on audio unless maybe you have a physical copy to reference. And then lastly, I want to talk about an audiobook that I actually stopped listening to, and I didn't end up reading this book at all last year. I only listened to it for like 30 minutes before giving up on it because it was that bad. And that is Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. This is narrated by Amy Landon, and I had never listened to anything that she narrated before, and I can tell you that I won't be listening to anything she narrates in the future. This book is really high on my TBR, and I have been wanting to read it forever, so I was really excited when I got the audiobook, but I was so disappointed when I started listening to it. The problem that I had with this narrator was that she literally sounded like a robot. I'm not exaggerating when I say that it sounded like Siri was reading the book to me. It sounded so much like a robot or artificial intelligence that I thought maybe it had to do with some plot twist in the book, and I even tweeted out asking for someone who had already read the book to reach out to me, and I asked that person if AIs or robots had anything to do with what was going on in this book because of the way the narrator was narrating it, and they assured me that that was not the case. And so once I was sure that it had nothing to do with something actually going on in the story, I knew that I couldn't listen to this book. I went on and listened to samples of other books that Amy Landon has narrated, and they all sound like that. They all sound like a robot is reading the book. I mean, not like super robotic, but as robotic as Siri sounds. So that is one narrator that I definitely cannot recommend to you. Alright guys, those are all of the best and worst audiobooks that I listened to last year. If you guys have any favorite narrators or narrators that you avoid, let me know about them down in the comment section, because I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and if I know that a certain book has a really good narrator, I'll add it to my Goodreads shelf so that I know that when I get around to reading that book, I should try to listen to it instead of just reading it physically. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you like bookish content. I post 1 to 2 times a week. That is all I have for now. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bookworms, keep reading. Bye. I read the first book I listened to all 3 of the I listened to all 3 books in the Queen of the Trillion and the only one that I was now that I am familiar with